In Cotton Fever, after a failed attempt at treatment, James, played by Kyle Gallner, slips back into using and dealing despite his girlfriend Dina, played by Sosie Bacon's pregnancy and the looming responsibility of fatherhood. Meanwhile, Dina's hopes of stability are upended by her own relapse, pulling her further away from her desired life. Around them, others come and go in fleeting moments, revealing the complexities of survival and care in a small corner of the world. Cotton Fever is directed by Daniel Blake Schwartz, and this film is his feature directorial debut, and Cotton Fever is based on the short film from 2022, Cotton Fever, from the same director, and Cotton Fever just debuted at the 2026 Tribeca Film Festival. Cotton Fever is a pretty impressive directorial debut from director Daniel Blake Schwartz. I think, yes, this is familiar. Yes, everything in this film, there's nothing in this film we haven't seen before, but I just think that the storytelling, the performances, and the situations that all of the characters get into this, when they get into this film, is enough to overcome the familiarity of the themes and the story in this film. When the film opens, we meet Kyle Gallner, and he's admitted himself to a rehab clinic, and he is moving very slowly, talking very slowly, can't really concentrate on anything, and he ends up just walking out of that rehab studio. And then we meet him later on in the film, and he's like small time, like drug dealing and using on the streets of Boston. But at this point in his life, he's just trying to get back to regular life. His partner, played by Sosie Bacon, she's working full time, and she's been off drugs for quite a while. She's been sober for a while, and they're really starting to get back their life back together. They're applying for a new apartment, so things are going well for them. But when Kyle Gallner, he gets back into start using drugs again, that's when their lives really take a downfall again. So they end up spending most of the film apart because Sosie Bacon finds some drugs in his pocket one day, and she just can't help herself. She ends up using the drugs, and she ends up almost like overdosing, and she ends up in a rehab, and she spends maybe the second half of the film in this rehab center trying to get better. But Kyle Gallner and Sosie Bacon's character also intersect with other characters throughout this film. So this is very much an ensemble piece. So there's also a lesbian couple played by Chabely Ponce and Ari Mora, and they pretty much live on the streets and just trying to get any money they can to get their fix, get their drugs, and they end up just robbing anybody they can. And after some tragedy in the second half of the film, Chabely Ponce, she ends up in the same rehab center as Sosie Bacon. And I think the strength of this film is the performances from everybody in this film, and just the way the situation is that everybody gets into this film. The Kyle Gallner character and the Chabely Ponce and Ari Mora characters, they get into some really tense scenes when they're trying to get drugs and steal drugs and just run away from the bad guys. So it's just the way to direct the film scene is very tense and very action-packed. So, and I just think these performances in these scenarios that all of these characters get into as the film goes on is able to overcome the familiarity of this. Like we've seen so many films like this of characters on the streets are addicted to drugs. So, but I just think this film is able to overcome the familiarity of these themes. And I think the film does a great job of contrasting the difference between being on the street and also being in rehab, because we do spend a lot of time in the rehab center with Sosie Bacon and her variety of roommates she shares throughout the film, and just the way how difficult it is for the addiction to overcome this addiction and not just go back on the street and go back into using again. So that contrast between being in rehab and also or living on the streets, and also the way the people, the professionals in the rehab center trying to, it's interesting to see how they try to rehab these patients in the rehab center. So just the contrast between those two scenarios was interesting. There's one thing that didn't work for me in this film, and it's another kind of like subplot involving one character played by Ronald Emile. He has kind of like a brother who's addicted to drugs, and and Ronald's like a social worker or something, and he just walks around the film looking for his brother and looking intense and looking after other people who are addicted to drugs. I just think because the film mainly focuses on Kyle Gallner, Sosie Bacon, Chabely Ponce and Ari Mora, and his character played by Ronald Emile, he's kind of like an afterthought. He's no characterization there. There's not really much detail between him and his brother. So I just think his character probably wasn't really, either should have been expanded, because the film is only less than 90 minutes long. So this film could have been a little bit longer, just to expand his character a little bit more, a little bit more of a backstory, or just delete his character from the film whatsoever. So I just didn't find his plot or his character very engaging throughout the film. I give Cotton Fever 3.5 stars out of 5. I definitely recommend checking out this very impressive directorial debut from director Daniel Blake Schwartz. It's very familiar, but I think the performances, the scenarios that all these characters get in, and also the way the director directs these very intense, action-packed thrilling scenes, is able to overcome the familiarity of the themes and the story that the film is trying to portray. So I definitely recommend checking out this film, Cotton Fever. Thanks for watching. What do you think of Cotton Fever? Please comment below what you thought of the film. See you next time. Bye.